Hello, everyone. This is Adam with AEW Maine Treasure Adventures. We are going on an amazing adventure today in Bangor, Maine. I believe most people that live around here don't even know it's here. This is the USS Maine Monument. It's located at the Davenport Park, directly across the Bangor Police Department. It's near the corner of Main and Cedar Streets. The best way to see the monument is from Main Street via the path lined by plantings. With a couple granite benches, the monument is triangular in shape. The granite base is 12 feet high, or 3.7 meters. The monument is composed of blocks of ashlar granite. The overall effect is to make it look like the bow of the ship. Affixed to the granite are the original shield and scrolls of the USS Maine. The memorial is topped by a bronze light with an eagle at its crown. The bronze plaque at the front of the monument bearing the following inscription: "To the memory of the soldiers and sailors of the Spanish-American War, 1898. Shield and scrolls recovered from the wreckage of the USS Maine, blown up Havana Harbor, Cuba, February 15th, 1898. Erected by the city of Bangor, 1922. Let's talk about the history of the USS Maine. Congress authorized construction of the Maine on August 3rd, 1886, at the Brooklyn Navy Yard. She was the largest vessel built in the U.S. Navy Yard up to that time. USS Maine was 324 feet 4 inches long overall, with a beam of 57 feet, a maximum draft of 22 feet 6 inches, and a displacement of 6,682 long tons. She was divided into 214 watertight compartments. Maine's hull was long and narrow, more like that of a cruiser. Her main turrets awkwardly situated on the cutaway gun deck. The ship was nearly awash in any bad weather, because the guns were mounted towards the ends of the ship, away from its center of gravity. Maine was also prone to greater motion in heavy seas. The Maine waterline belt, made of nickel steel, had a maximum thickness of 12 inches and tapered to 7 inches at its lower edge. The USS Maine superstructure was separated into 3 structures. This allowed both turrets to fire across the ship's deck. Cross-deck fire between the sections. Needless to say, she wasn't perfect. The USS Maine was the first American capital ship for which its power plant was afforded as high a priority as was its fighting strength. She had 2 inverted vertical triple expansion steam engines, mounted in watertight compartments and separated by a fore to aft bulkhead. With a total designed output of 9,293 indicated horsepower, 8 single-ended Scotch marine boilers provided steam to the engine at a working pressure of 135 pounds per square inch, at a temperature of 364 degrees Fahrenheit. On trials, she reached a speed of 16.45 knots, although failing to meet her contract speed of 17 knots. She carried a maximum load of 896 long tons of coal and 20 bunkers, 10 on each side, which extended below the protective deck. We will talk more about this in a minute when we go over what happened to the USS Maine. 2 flaws emerged in the Maine's protection. both due to technological developments between her laying down and her completion. The first was a lack of adequate topside armor to counter the effects of rapid-fire, intermediate caliber guns and high explosive shells. The second was the use of nickel steel armor, introduced in 1889. Nickel steel was the first modern steel alloy armor. The USS Maine was officially launched on November 18th, 1889. The Maine stands in a class all by herself when it comes to armored warships at the time. The USS Maine was commissioned on September 17, 1895, under the command of Captain Arant S. Crowninshield. On November 5, 1895, Maine steamed to Sandy Hook Bay, New Jersey. She anchored there for 2 days, then proceeded to Newport, Rhode Island, for fitting out and test firing of her torpedoes. After a trip later that month to Portland, Maine, she reported to the North Atlantic Squadron for operations, training maneuvers, and fleet exercises. Maine spent her active career with the North Atlantic Squadron, operating from Norfolk, Virginia, along the east coast of the United States and the Caribbean. On April 10, 1897, Captain Charles Dwight Sigsbee relieved Captain Crowninshield as commander of Maine. This was the beginning of the end for the most powerful warship of the time. In January 1898, Maine was sent from Key West, Florida to Havana, Cuba, to protect American interests during the Cuban War of Independence. She arrived at 11 local time on January 25th. About 3 weeks after arriving in Havana, at 9:40 p.m. on February 15th, an explosion on the Maine occurred in the Havana Harbor. The explosion devastated the warship. 5 long tons of powder charges for the vessel's 6 and 10-inch guns had detonated, obliterating the forward third of the ship. The remaining wreckage sinking rapidly and settled to the bottom of the harbor. Most of Maine's crew were sleeping or resting in the enlisted quarters in the forward part of the ship when the explosion occurred. The ship's crew consisted of 355 total people, 26 officers, 290 enlisted sailors, and 39 Marines. Of these, there were 261 fatalities. 2 officers and 251 enlisted sailors or Marines were killed by the explosion or drowned. 7 others were rescued but soon died of their injuries. 1 officer later died of shock. Of the 94 survivors, 16 were uninjured. Captain Sigsbee and most of the officers survived because their quarters were in the aft portion of the ship. The City of Washington, an American merchant steamship, aided in rescuing the crew. The aftermath of the sinking is the interesting part. The cause of the incident was immediately debated. Waking President McKinley to break the news, Commander Francis W. Dickens called it an accident, while George Dewey, commander of the Atlantic Squadron, feared at first that she had been destroyed by the Spanish, which of course meant war. Navy Captain Philip R. Alger, an expert on ordnance and explosives, posted a bulletin at the Navy Department the next day, communicating that the explosion had been caused by a spontaneous fire in the coal bunkers. Assistant Navy Secretary Theodore Roosevelt wrote a letter protesting this statement, which he viewed as premature. Roosevelt argued that Alger should not have commented on an ongoing investigation, Navy Captain Philip R. Alger was correct in his assessment. However, he was ignored. The USS Maine incident generated support for the military action against the Spanish in Cuba, regardless of their actual involvement in the sinking. This now brings us to the end result of the sinking of the USS Maine. The McKinley administration were already inclined to wage war with Spain over perceived atrocities and loss of control in Cuba. Advocates of the war used the rallying cry, "Remember the Maine." To hell with Spain. The Spanish-American War began on April 21st, 1898, 2 months after the sinking. The Spanish-American War lasted from April 21st, 1898 until December 10th, 1898. A total of 7 months, 2 weeks, and 5 days. In that period, 4,119 American soldiers died, 56,500 Spanish died. America got the victory that they were after, and the results were the Treaty of Paris of 1898 was signed, funding of the First Philippine Republic, and the beginning of the Philippine-American War. Spain sells to Germany its last colonies in the Pacific in 1899, the end of the Spanish Empire in America and Asia. The territorial changes Spain relinquishes sovereignty over Cuba, Puerto Rico, Guam, and Philippines to the United States. $20 million paid to Spain by the United States for infrastructure owned by Spain. All of this stemmed from an accident that was blamed on Spain. All investigations after the fact agreed that an explosion of the forward magazines caused the destruction of the ship, but different conclusions were reached regarding the exact cause of the explosion. It wasn't Spain that caused the explosions or had anything to do with the sinking of the USS Maine. When the Maine was raised in preparation for burial at sea in 1912, key pieces of the ship were removed and placed around the United States for memorials to the sailors that lost their lives in the sinking and the men killed in this war. During the salvage, the remains of 66 men were found, of whom only one, Harry J. Keyes, an engineering officer, was identified and returned to his hometown. The rest were reburied at Arlington National Cemetery. On March 16, 1912, the Maine was towed 4 miles from the Cuban coast. She was loaded with dynamite as a possible aid to her sinking. Flowers adorned Maine's deck, and an American flag was strung from her mast. At 5 p.m. local time, with a crowd of over 100,000 people watching from the shore, her sea hatches were opened, and just over 20 minutes later, the Maine sank, bow first, in 3,600 feet of water, to the sound of taps and a 21-gun salute. Some of the pieces and locations of the salvage pieces of the USS Maine, the one we are at in Bangor, Maine, the Shield and Scrolls. The main mast is at Arlington National Cemetery over the graves of the 260 crew members. The foremast is at the United States Naval Academy. The anchor is in Reading, Pennsylvania. The windlass is in Key West, Florida. The Cuban Friendship Urn in Washington, D.C. A 6-inch gun from the USS Maine is at Fort Allen Park in Portland, Maine. The Hancock Society Museum in Findlay, Ohio is home to the captain's bathtub from the USS Maine. The Maine's engine room funnel went to Pompton's Lake, New Jersey, where it was placed as an eternal memorial marker in a park area on the Hamburg Turnpike. Do you know if any pieces of the USS Maine made it to your state? If so, let me know what pieces and where they're located. Until the next adventure, AEW out.